Traveling to Consciousness, exploring spiritual journeys to find answers in uncertainty.
All right, what is up, Conscious Monkeys? Welcome back to another episode of Traveling to Consciousness. As always, I'm your host, Clayton, and in today's podcast, we have an incredible guest. His name is Dr. Professor Alan Dershowitz. So, Alan, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to see where this conversation goes.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation as well.
Cool. And in case people haven't seen you on TV or know you from maybe some of your interesting trials and let's say illegal battles, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong because a lot of my information comes from Wikipedia, but you were a part of the defense team for O.J. Simpson, Jeffrey Epstein, Julien Assange, Harvey Weinstein, and Donald Trump. So I think my first question is are you just really interested in controversial law situations?
Well, I do most of my cases pro bono. I have also represented Nelson Mandela, Anatoly Sharansky, a Soviet dissident. I participated pro bono in the defense of Bill Clinton. So I don't pick my cases based on controversiality. Also, many of my clients are obscure. Many women who have been battered by their husbands who I represent free of charge. So, I've been doing this for 60 years. I've had probably 300 clients over the 60 years, and you only know about the famous ones and the ones that are controversial.
Of course.
I love to win cases that never are in the paper or never in the media. I just win and walk away, and my client goes home happy and resumes life with his family. So I don't shy away from controversy. I take my cases based on the Constitution. And, for example, when I defended Donald Trump on the floor of the Senate, I hadn't voted for him. I had voted for Hillary Clinton. And I never mentioned his name once. I talked about the presidency of the United States under the Constitution. So, I've had an interesting and a varied career. Democrats, Republicans, men, women, good guys, bad guys. And I'm now 86, so I hope the good Lord gives me the power to continue to do this at least for a few more years.
Well, you definitely seem like you have the energy for it, so that's always, a good sign.
Yeah.
So it seems like you're very principled in those regards then, right? Is that it sounds like, and I feel like I've heard this in the way you speak, is that it's really to you about the Constitution. So whenever you're looking at, let's say, these cases, right? And I think we'll get there because I know we want to talk about like how FBI can like meddle with like evidence tampering.
Yeah.
With these, let's say like with these cases, because again, it's probably what most people are hearing, they're thinking about, they're listening. It seems like a big issue that can arise is public opinion, right? You see certain things, the way media can shape certain aspects. So how do you maybe stick to the Constitution whenever the whole world could be sitting here telling you these people are guilty, and yet, you have to trust that to follow like the law of the land?
It happens all the time. I spent over 50 years on Martha's Vineyard. It was my summer home. And nobody on Martha's Vineyard around where we live talks to me anymore because I defended Donald Trump. And so I know it takes enormous amount of thick skin to do this kind of thing, but I have to do it. Somebody has to do it. I don't want to compare myself to John Adams, but when John Adams defended the people accused of the Boston Massacre, nobody in Boston would talk to him. He was a pariah, and the same thing has happened to me and will continue to happen to me. And people come up to me sometimes and hey, F you, and I never know which client it is they're upset about. About right-wing clients, some about left-wing clients, some about men, some about women. I don't pick and choose my clients based on whether I like them or I like what they're accused of doing. In fact, some of the people I've represented have done things that I despise and hate. I'll never forget, I was asked by Palestinian students at Harvard if I would sue Harvard, which I was working at, in order to permit the Palestinian flag to fly to celebrate Yasser Arafat's death. Now, I thought Yasser Arafat, still think, was a mass murderer with blood on his hands, but I think the students had a right to fly his flag, so I defended their right, and we won. And they flew the flag, and I went to the event and protested Yasser Arafat. So the First Amendment was alive and well. They were stating their points. I was stating my points. That's what I like to see. There are many people who don't like that. I'll give you an example of a prominent person in American life today. James Carville, the political commentator who helped Bill Clinton win his election, he came after me and other lawyers who were principled, and he accused us of being too interested in the truth, and too interested in due process, and too interested in free speech, and too interested in the rule of law. Basically, he was saying, it's winning, stupid. That's all you should care about is winning, winning, winning. Well, I'm not a political person. I'm not going to disclose, for example, who I voted for in the last election. That's my business. That's between me and my family, but I will disclose who I will defend, and I will continue to defend people I dislike. I defended the rights of Nazis to march in Skokie. When I was a college student, I defended the rights of communists to teach at Brooklyn College, even though I hated communism. So, yeah, I think very much about principle. And for many Americans, it's free speech for me, but not for thee, due process for me, but not for thee. I don't fall into that category.
Well, I mean, clearly not, because you were just talking about defending the rights of Palestinians to, let's say, celebrate a murderer.
Right.
And yet, did you have something to add? And yet,
say it again.
Well, I'm saying that you defended the rights of Palestinians to celebrate, and fly their flag. And yet, I believe I did research that you're Jewish yourself. I believe you've talked about synagogue. You're wearing an Israeli flag right now.
That's right. And a hostage flag. Yeah.
And a hostage flag. So I think in my mind, or like at least in the general public, that would create some sort of tension. Like, he's Jewish, but he's protecting Palestinians.
Yeah.
So how do you compartmentalize that? Like, how does that register in your brain?
It doesn't require compartmentalization. For me, it's all about free speech and the Constitution and defending people I despise. When I spoke and at the flag raising for Yasser Arafat, I talked his death. I said his death was untimely. If he had only died 4 years earlier, maybe we would have had peace. So, I was wishing that he died earlier. That's my free speech right. But I defended the free speech right of people I disagreed with. I've done that all my life. The only place I don't have free speech is at home, where my wife tells me what I can say and what I can't. And she tries to tell me who I can vote for and who I can't vote for, but I don't always listen.
You at least tell her that you're listening, right?
Well, I vote privately, so she doesn't know who I voted for.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Look, speech is at the forefront, along with due process of the rule of law, and that's what separates us from tyrannies.
Well, for sure. And I mean, I think it's very fascinating that, you've probably surrounded your entire life with lawyers. I mean, that's who's running our government, essentially. 90-something% are lawyers. And so to hear even that, like, all of these, like, let's say clubs, like you're talking about Martha's Vineyard, I think I even saw in a recent podcast or video you did that, like, you were close with the owner of the Red Sox. And then after, basically defending the Constitution, you're no longer there. He kicked you out, essentially, of...
He gave me a ring when the Red Sox won the World Series. I sat next to him over and over again during many of the playoff games. I was in the locker room when the Red Sox won the World Series, and Big Papi poured champagne on my head. Now, I don't even think they'd let me into Fenway Park because I committed the cardinal sin, not of rooting for the Cardinals, but the cardinal sin of defending Donald Trump against an unconstitutional impeachment. So, look, it's hard to live with me, as my wife and family know, because my family members, people come up to them on the street or places where they have friends and say, how could you allow your father, or how could you allow your husband to defend this guy? It was O.J. Simpson, it was Klaus von Bülow, it was Harry Reams, you name it. Whoever I defended, there were people who thought it was outrageous. There were other people who loved it. I remember I was defending two Mikes at the same time, Mike Tyson, the boxing champ, and I was also defending Mike Milken, the financial guy. And people would come up to me at the airport and hug me and say, thank you for defending Mike. And I would always know which Mike they were referring to. They said and how they looked, but almost nobody said, "Thank you for defending both Mikes." That's
Mm.
the way it goes. And you have to have a thick skin to be a criminal defense lawyer. I tell that to my students. I tell my students all the time, most of you should not be criminal defense lawyers. You just don't have the thick enough skin to deal with this. But don't condemn us who are willing to put our lives, reputation, friendships on the line. I've had death threats. I've had to have the FBI come with me to classes and
Wow.
to basketball games and baseball games because I had death threats on me for who I represented.
That's wild. Yeah. So then how do you get the thick skin, right? Because I think maybe in my generation, maybe it's just the world today, it seems like our skin's becoming thinner and thinner.
Yeah,
Is that like just a muscle that you need to keep working? How do you develop that?
it's my history. The fact that I was born in 1938 and grew up during the Holocaust, and understand that nobody was willing to defend the Jews when they were being persecuted by the Nazis in Germany first, and then in Poland and other places. Nobody would stand up for them. Not the President of the United States, not the Prime Minister of England, not the Pope, nobody. And so I was brought up that everybody has to be defended, and particularly underdogs, people who the government is coming after. So I am a product, although I was only, 7 or 8 years old when the Holocaust ended. I am a product of the Holocaust. I grew up in a neighborhood with survivors that had, their numbers tattooed on their wrists, and they wouldn't
Wow.
take them off because they wanted the world to see what they had been through. And so many people lost relatives. I lost relatives during the Holocaust. And, I've lost relatives in Israel recently because of terrorism. So I understand what it means not to have people speaking out on your behalf. And I promised myself from a very early age, from the time I was really a teenager, that I would always speak up for the underprivileged and for the unrepresented.
Well, good for you. I mean, good for you. And especially, in terms of following the law and everything else coming with that. And you touched on the FBI there. So maybe it's a good transition, right? Let's say hypothetically, right? Because I don't know the situations. Obviously, there's privileged information here. But let's say that you do have a client who is or isn't guilty. Maybe they did do it. How are you able to say, like, well, even if they did do it, then I need to make sure that the law is followed, and like you have to have the evidence to do that, because then you have the whole other avenue here of like maybe there's false evidence that's created, maybe it's not. So like, how are you able to? And again, maybe it's just the principality of it, of like we have to have the law, but how are you able to maybe separate that or view that whenever dealing with a criminal client?
Yeah, no, look, I've had clients who were guilty but framed. That is, they were,
Okay.
but the government planted evidence against them. I'm not talking about any particular client. That was clearly the case. Prosecutors believed that was the case with O.J. Simpson and with Klaus von Bülow. So for me, process is everything. Felix Frankfurter, the great justice of the Supreme Court, once said, the history of liberty is a history of procedure, a history of due process being followed. If you allow the government to plant evidence, if you allow the government to tamper with evidence, you're never going to know whether the person was guilty or innocent. The person may seem guilty. The person may indeed be guilty. But if a conviction is allowed to stand based on tampered evidence or faked evidence, the process is then legitimated that would allow the planting of evidence against innocent people, against you, against me. And I've been the victim of false charges myself in the Jeffrey Epstein case. And, fortunately for me, the woman who falsely accused me then came forward and admitted that she may have confused me with somebody else and misidentified me and withdrew all the charges and dropped all of her claims against me. So in my view, I was completely vindicated, but I went through hell when there was this accusation by a woman I never met, never heard of, never had any encounter with. It wasn't a situation where, oh, yeah, two people had sex. One said it was consensual. The other said it wasn't. I had no contact or knowledge or anything
Yeah.
about the person who accused me. It was completely a product of a false identification. So I understand it from personal experience, and that experience made it clear to me that I had been right in devoting my life to defending people who have been victims of either false allegations or allegations involving tampered evidence.
Yeah, and I think I'm trying to view this from like a public perspective too, right? Because I think very quickly the news or the media could very quickly spin false evidence, create and whip up a public storm. Is there a way as the general public that we're able to see whether or not false evidence is created?
Yeah, there are, and it's called a hearing. And what is essential is when serious allegations of government misconduct are made, there has to be a public, open evidentiary hearing with subpoena power, with the right to call witnesses, with the right to present experts, with the right to challenge the government. The right to challenge the government is in the Constitution. It's in the Sixth Amendment, the right to confront witnesses and to confront the evidence against you. It's also in the First Amendment, the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The entire structure of our Constitution is to make public, not keep private, any complaints that you have about government misconduct, and yet the courts sometimes cooperate with the government in keeping things secret, and that should never, ever be done. Transparency is essential to democracy.
I completely agree with that. That transparency is essential to democracy. So then if we're so from a public opinion, and it seems like just kind of like wait for the proceedings to unfold to see what happens. As a defense attorney, how do you sort through evidence, and like are there tell signs whenever you're looking at evidence and oh, that was planted?
Yeah, well, my specialty has always been law and science. From the time I started teaching at Harvard Law School in 1964, even before that, when I was writing for the Yale Law Journal, my emphasis was always on the relationship between science and law. And so I'm very well trained to identify mistakes. And I would say the vast majority of my cases, certainly most of my murder cases, and I've done, 35 or so homicide-related cases, they've almost all involved scientific mistakes. O.J. Simpson case, the Klaus von Bülow case. I had a case of a man who was almost sentenced to death, one vote away from being sentenced to death for injecting his wife and killing her, and we were able to prove that there was no, it just didn't happen. She had had a stroke and died of natural causes. We were able to prove that scientifically. But there's no obvious telltale sign, but a good lawyer has to be very well versed in science. I tell my students or my friends' children who want to go to law school, they say, oh, we're going to study pre-law. I say, no, don't study pre-law. Study science, study philosophy, but don't study pre-law. You'll get enough law when you're in law school, but if you're going to be a good lawyer, you have to understand the scientific method. You have to understand what a false positive is, what a false negative is. You have to understand how to balance false negatives and false positives. Better 10 guilty, go free than one innocent be wrongly convicted. So these are the kinds of things that I try to convey to young people.
Wow. No, that sounds very positive and something I definitely would never have thought of needing to become a scientist and to be a good lawyer.
And I hire scientists all the time when I'm representing somebody, because obviously I'm a generalist, but often you need people who are real specialists. The Supreme Court, in a case called Daubert, several years ago, set out procedures for how you determine whether or not it's junk science or real science. And a lot of what is presented in court is junk science. It just doesn't satisfy any standards of scientific rigor, and it's the job of the defense attorney to expose that.
Wow. Yeah, and so then I'm trying to think this through, right? Is like, so then whenever it comes to that, do you find that in more situations than not, let's say if it's the FBI or anyone else presenting junk science, is it from malintent or is it from ignorance, do you feel like?
I would say 90% of the time it's not evil intent. And the times that it is evil intent, it's evil in the sense of the policeman or the FBI agent or the prosecutor, they know that they're using false evidence, but they believe the defendant is guilty. So they think they're on the side of the angels. Roy told me that when he, after he prosecuted the Rosenbergs, he said he knew the Rosenbergs, particularly him, was guilty because they had illegal wiretaps and they couldn't reveal them. So they planted evidence against them to frame guilty people. So you get some prosecutors, police, who believe they're doing the right thing when they're doing the wrong thing. There are some who just do it for opportunistic reasons, for promotion reasons. So the FBI, for the most part, is very honorable. I've had friends in the FBI at the highest levels, including one of them being a director of the FBI. I have tremendous admiration for the FBI, but the FBI is an enormous organization, and there are some bad apples. And there are people in the FBI who will sometimes, either through negligence or through deliberateness, fake evidence. I mean, in the Keith Raniere case, for example, the evidence seems overwhelming based on the scientific investigations of former FBI agents and real experts that a photograph that was found of a young woman who was naked was the date was changed to make her seem underage when in fact she was not underage. And what we're seeking in that case is a hearing to get experts to testify, to make a public record that can be sent to Congress, that can be sent to the media, to demonstrate that the FBI, maybe well-intentioned, wanted to get the defendant, didn't think it was nice for him to take a picture of an 18 or 19-year-old young woman. And so the date was changed to make her seem like she was a 15-year-old young woman. That made all the difference in the world legally. And we should have an opportunity to prove that in court. The government's word shouldn't be taken for that. You know, you don't trust, even, was it Ronald Reagan? Trust but verify. I would change that to distrust and verify. The essence of our confrontational adversarial legal system is distrust. You don't trust any evidence just on the basis of the fact that the government introduced it. The fact that the government introduced it makes it more powerful to the jury. That's why it's even more important than when the government introduces evidence that has the imprimatur of the United States, that it be subjected to rigorous scientific testing by experts. And we're not getting that so far in the Keith Raniere case. And until and unless that's done, nobody should be satisfied with the current results in that case and the conviction and the imprisonment of a man who may very well be absolutely innocent of the charge of photographing an underage woman.
I don't think I'm familiar with that, but you keep bringing it up. How do you spell it? Keith Raniere?
I'm not a good speller, but you can check it on Google.
Okay. I'll see if I can find it real quick. But Raniere, so Raniere. So then I think this leads to another question, though, of do you find that there's any changes that need to happen within the FBI or the DOJ that would limit these sort of, let's say, accidents?
Yes, absolutely. There should be an ombudsman in the FBI, somebody who checks on FBI agents. Anytime any kind of complaint is made, there should be an objective, complete, rigorous, scientific evaluation of what's going on. And any defendant and their lawyers should have the right to invoke that check and balance. We don't have that now. We depend on the courts, and the courts, as we can see from this and other cases, can't be counted on, because for them, finality is important. Oh, he's in jail, forget about it. Lock him up, throw away the key. Don't bother us with new evidence. Don't bother us with claims of impropriety. We're not interested in that. We're satisfied. The conviction has been had. You can't do that in a country under the rule of law. There's no such thing as too late. We see people on death row today. In Texas recently, somebody for shaking a baby and the baby dies. And there's all kind of scientific evidence that shows it didn't happen. And yet he's waiting to be executed, and they're having a hard time getting the issue in front of any court. A court should always be open, and the court of public opinion should always be open to challenges to the scientific rigor of any information on which a conviction has been based.
So it sounds like then not even just from an executive branch, but there's also changes that could happen within the judicial branch as well. Is that what I'm hearing?
Definitely, all three branches. The legislative branch can have hearings. The judicial branch could have a rule that says that any time a defendant makes a plausible case of scientific or other kinds of prosecutorial error, there must be a hearing. And I think the executive branch as well. The executive branch has the power to pardon and the power of the bully pulpit. And so I think we have to see all branches of the government, plus non-branches, the media, the churches, the academy, all serving as checks and balances on the possibility of government overreach.
Yeah, that's interesting you put it that way, right? Because when we hear separation of powers and checks and balances, we usually think of it in terms of legislative, judicial, executive. But the way you're framing it here, and it makes sense, is like even create checks and balances within the FBI, within these individual branches. And then you can even find a check and balance in regards to, let's say, the media, which I think would have been ideal as where they used to be. But it seems like now they're becoming a little bit more tainted, if you will.
Oh, there's no question about that. And that's the beauty of checks and balances, is that when the media turns extremely left, maybe the legislature will turn right, or the judiciary. You're always going to have different input into different branches of government. The academy has turned very hard left. So even, for example, when you have a situation where the president, the Senate, the House, and the judiciary are all on one side politically, you still have people outside serving as checks and balances on them.
Definitely. And it seems like, if we're touching into the idea of integrity, right? Like you obviously have thick skin, but let's say a lot of these other lawyers who are congressmen, representatives, maybe they don't have such thick skin. And so then they'll compromise their moral integrity because they're afraid of the media and how they would cast them in maybe a certain light, which then even erodes the fabric of that institution.
I agree. Look, each of us who has access to the media is part of the system of checks and balances. Silence is not an option. As Burke once said, all that is necessary for evil to prevail is for good people to remain silent. And I refuse to remain silent. It's gotten me into a lot of trouble. It's lost me some friends. It's lost me a lot of money over the years. I've had to defend myself, but it's been worth it.
And maybe that's the point, is that it's worth it, right? So, and maybe that's something, right, that people might not be able to see. Because I know in my life, some of the most difficult times have created, what's the saying? Pressure makes diamonds.
Yeah.
So like, how is there like maybe like something that you feel like as like something people could do on like a daily basis, or a way to maybe start growing thicker skin so that they're able to handle that pressure?
Well, I wrote a book about that. It's called The Price of Principle, in which I tell the stories about how expensive it has been to me to live a life of principle. But in the end, how it's worth it. And how, if you're a person of principle, you have no choice, you have no alternative. If you're committed to the truth, if you're committed to due process, you have to assert it and be willing to take the consequences, the price of principle. And that's what I believe in very strongly.
Do you feel like that's something that would have stemmed from your faith in God or Judaism, or what?
I would say more from experience. Most religions have aspects that cut both ways. The devil can cite scripture. You can find things in the Jewish Bible, the Christian Bible, the Quran, that are very positive toward justice, but then you find things that are not so positive. And, good imams, priests, rabbis, ministers know how to pick and choose from biblical sources to convey the best. In Judaism, for example, is a concept of tikkun olam, repair of the world, which is used by many rabbis to instill in their congregants the need to repair the world and do good things. But there are also things in everybody's religious texts that you would not want to emulate. Obviously, criticisms and double standards. So, be eclectic. Choose the best aspects of your faith and follow them. And that's what most people do, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. Is like, here's a path and kind of
Yeah.
follow which part of it you feel is accurate.
It's interesting because the Jewish word for the Hebrew word for the law or the rules is halacha, which means the road, the path. I like that word, halacha.
Halacha.
Halachot, which is the plural, because there are many paths. And as Yogi Berra said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. You have to pick and choose which path you're going to take or which paths you're going to take. One of my kids got me a button once, and it quoted Frost. I came to a place where there were two roads, and then the button says, "And I took them both." That's what I've been trying to do for the 60 years that I've been in public life. I've tried very hard to not limit myself to one profession. I've been a law professor. I've been a professional writer, 55 books. I've
Wow.
been a speaker. I've been, a public intellectual appearing on wonderful podcasts like yours. So when I was a kid, I couldn't decide what I wanted to do when I grow up. I'm now 86 and I still can't decide what I want to do when I grow up. So I'm doing it all, hopefully. And if the good Lord gives me the strength to follow through for many years, I would be very grateful, and I would try to devote myself to tikkun olam, to repairing the world, to helping people who are less fortunate.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I think I've seen something very similar in my life in regards to, like, software engineer, podcaster, businessman, like
Great.
all these different avenues pop up. And so it's that idea of taking both. Have
Yeah.
you found that bringing up or like learning in these different fields tends to raise all the other fields, like your ability?
Definitely, without a doubt. I used to teach a course at Harvard with a great paleontologist and a great philosopher. It was called Thinking About Thinking. And the object is to show how knowing one discipline well allows you to ask questions in other disciplines. And so the more you know about one subject, the better you're able to question other subjects. I certainly feel that way about my career because I know science fairly well and mathematics. I've taught courses in science and the law, mathematics and the law. I've litigated cases. I've written books on those subjects. It makes me a better lawyer. And one reason I was successful in the classroom is I brought the courtroom into the classroom. I would bring real cases into the classroom. And the reason I was successful in the courtroom is I brought the classroom into the courtroom. And I would, use my academic background to help win cases.
Very cool. Very cool. Do you find that, yeah, because I've seen that as well in regards of like being able to mix these like two different worlds.
Yeah.
From like a culture standpoint, because me being brought up, and obviously different generations here, but like me being brought up, it always seemed like, you go to college, you do this one thing, then you get a job, you do that one thing. Do you feel like there's something societally or legally or whatever it is that we could do to encourage people to maybe like branch out and experience different fields?
Yeah, and some companies do that. Some companies give their employees the ability to take classes or to take a leave and do something else for a short period of time. Look, I think everybody should dip their toes into different things if they can. Look, that's a luxury that people who are economically secure can do more easily than somebody who has to go to work every day and has double shifts or two jobs to put food on the table. So, it's a kind of an elitist thing. But I know people who work very hard just for hourlies, and yet, they read, they stand online, and they get tickets to the opera that are inexpensive. If you live in America, there are so many opportunities to do so many things, more opportunities if you have the wherewithal. But in a place like New York, people who are poor, I see it when I go to Lincoln Center and other places. People who are poor, sometimes people will stand in front of the opera and ask, "Do you have an extra ticket? Do you have an extra ticket?" And sometimes I do have an extra ticket if my wife isn't feeling well or she doesn't like the opera. And I love to give the extra ticket to some poor person who would otherwise not be able to afford to go to Lincoln Center. So I do think that places like Lincoln Center should make make a point of trying to make available rush tickets for poor people so that they can broaden their cultural horizons. And I do think employers would benefit by giving their employees options to engage in activities that are not just rigidly within their job descriptions.
Oh, yes. I've definitely seen in my own life. It seems like, and with my businesses, employees, if you're not, as long as you're not creating more fear, it seems like, and you're allowing them to express themselves, it revolutionizes. Like maybe the hours on the time card go down a little bit, but the productivity goes so much higher.
I agree with that. And I certainly used to do that when I had employees. I now pretty much work alone, but when I had employees, I would do that. I only have a few more minutes left, so ask me your hardest questions and make sure that you cover everything. I'm an open book.
Yeah. No, I don't have really like hard questions. I just love having a conversation with interesting people. You do only have a few more minutes. I know I'm going to have to grab The Price of Principle for sure, because that sounds right up my alley, right up my road.
Well, try to go online and read about the Keith Raniere case, because that is a scary, scary case. You have a situation where 7 experts, many of whom former trusted FBI agents with great credibility, all saying that this major piece of evidence that resulted in this guy being convicted and going to jail is fake, and the judge won't grant a hearing. The judge will not allow this to be set out in a court of law with subpoena power, with cross-examination. That just isn't right, and it can impact the lives of all of us. So I'm hoping to get people interested in this case and other cases like it to make sure that no one is deprived of due process, no matter how what people think of the accusations against them. Because remember, accusations are just accusations, and if they're based on false evidence, you can't rely on that. And again, I know how it feels to be the victim of false charges and false evidence, and I had the resources and the ability and the energy to fight it, and others haven't and can't. And fortunately, Keith Raniere has the resources to fight it. So I hope that we can recruit people to join our team to seek, from Congress, from the executive, from all branches of government, from the media, an opportunity to set this case straight.
Oh, definitely. And anyone listening, Keith, Keith, and then Raniere, Raniere. I'll definitely check into it myself.
Sure.
Is there a reason? I mean, you got to go soon, but is there a main reason, maybe shortly, why the judge isn't opening it?
Judges constantly quote the law saying, once a case is resolved, it's resolved. And there are all kinds of procedural barriers, but that's not justice.
Yeah.
If you have new evidence, if you have scientific evidence, it has to be heard. Again, transparency is the essence of democracy.
So would it take Congress to rewrite that law?
Congress can rewrite it. The courts can review it. The media can make demands. There are so many things in a democracy like ours that are available remedies. And again, the First Amendment, the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The Sixth Amendment, the right to confront your accuser. Those are fundamental to due process and the rule of law.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, I think you're doing some great work. We'll definitely, hopefully someone listening to this will be able to poke the hornet's nest a little bit.
Case is resolved. I'll come back and we'll talk about happy ending and how maybe justice has been done.
Definitely.
Until justice is done.
Yeah.
Something that I take very seriously. People say to me all the time, well, when's the case over? The case is over when my client goes free. So we hope that happens here. Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to coming back, and I know you're interviewing some other people that are interesting, and so please keep up your great work.
I appreciate it. It's an honor to hear that from you. And no, this was a great first conversation, and I'm excited to bring you back on as well. Great. We can talk more about, all the crazy stuff in your life. I know you've probably got a million stories that are just waiting there to be shared.
Thanks a lot for having me. Take care.
So Professor Dershowitz, thank you again. Guys, go check all of his stuff. Links will be down below. I appreciate you all, and we'll see you all in the 6th dimension.